I will continue some of the topics which were treated in this introductory paper to the conference, and I would like also to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me to contribute to this possibly one of the first virtual events at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. And in accordance with the principal conference goals, my paper intends to address topics related to the crucial role of the global Khurāsān in the wide-ranging religious and cultural exchange between the early Islamic Middle East and Central and East Asia, the interactions with Muslim and non-Muslim local traditions in Central Asia, the interactions between the contributions of Central Asian religious intellectual traditions to the formations of key philosophical and theological debates. And if I have a time, the impact of the religious and cultural dynamic, which I will be discussing on the museumology, art and material culture in the newly emerged states of Central Asia. But I'll probably leave this for the question and answer session. I will begin with short introduction to the spread of Manichaeism in the Middle East and Central Asia, just to introduce some of the key historical and religious concept, historical phases of this development, which will set the stage for the discussion of the Central and Inner Asian dynamics in the early Islamic period. Very briefly, the Gnostic schools of late antiquity drew widely on the inherited syncretistic heritage of antiquity and used widely and creatively Christian, Jewish, Greek, Iranian, Mesopotamian traditions to elaborate their basic mythic narratives and conceptual systems. The radical or absolute Gnostic dualism of the two primal fundamental principles of light and darkness, associated respectively with spirit and matter, received its most complex and systematic formulation in Manichaeism. The founder of this syncretistic Gnostic religion, Mani, in the 3rd century, declared his new mysteries as a basis of a new Gnostic system, universal, which became also the first Gnostic tradition, also to become a kind of world religion, a new Gnostic system of two contrary and coeternal principles of light and darkness, and the 3 times of their original separation, fusion, and cosmic struggle, and their future ultimate separation. In its mature form, Mani's Gnostic system, including elements of Gnosticism, Judeo-Christianity, Buddhism, as well as Zoroastrianism, with the use of Zoroastrian concepts and imagery being particularly pronounced in the Iranian version of Manichaeism. The canon of the Manichaean Church comprised 7 books written by Mani himself, but they were lost. And until the discovery of authentic Manichaean manuscripts early in the 20th century, Manichaean teachings were mainly through the accounts of church fathers. One of the important elements of Manichaean missionary strategy was to adjust Manichaean teachings to local religious terminology, the Manichaean version of contextual theology, which occasionally raises problems related to the reconstruction of Mani's original teaching by the Manichaean translation techniques of using loan terms from other religions, especially when we encounter the phenomenon of Manichaean world literature in Central Asia, when we have texts in Middle Persian, in Sogdian, in Chinese, and also in Old Turkic. The Manichaean Church of Light was divided into 2 main and distinct classes, the elect and the listeners. The elect formed, moreover, the Manichaean ecclesiastical hierarchy led by Mani's successor, who originally had his seat in Babylon. The initial Manichaean missionary routes were directed into northeast Iran and remained within the Sasanian and Zoroastrian spheres of control. Being tolerated during the reign of the Sasanian monarch Shapur I in the 3rd century, Manichaeism extended its missionary propaganda and network into eastern Iran, Bactria, and the Caucasus, as well as westward. Sorry about that. It also spread into Egypt and Syria, penetrating deep into the Mediterranean domains of the Roman Empire. Once the Zoroastrian reaction to Manichaean success in the Sasanian Empire intensified and Mani was executed in 274, a miniature of his execution, Manichaean missionary expansion came to be countered by waves of persecution, both in the Sasanian and the Roman empires. The westward course of the Manichaean mission eventually collapsed amid the barbarian invasions and the mounting persecution in the Roman Empire, while the Manichaean Church managed to retain its presence in Mesopotamia until the end of the Sasanian era, and Manichaeism received generally relaxed treatment during the period of the Umayyad dynasty, when some Manichaean followers returned to Mesopotamia. During the succeeding Abbasid era, however, more measures against the Manichaean movement were taken, which remained active in Babylonia into the 10th century. The appeal of Manichaean religious and mythic imagery, narratives, and socio-religious patterns of behavior to certain intellectual and religious trends within early Islam during the Umayyad and Abbasid periods remains a topic which merits a close investigation. Just 3 quotes to indicate the state of scholarly debate on this particular topic. In his famous book on the Greco-Arabic translation movement, Guta states that Manichaeism influenced enormous course in development of Islam as a religion and ideology during the early Abbasid era. Van Es also adds that certain Muslim intellectuals found in Manichaeism and related dualist system certain things that the Islam of their time could not offer them. It was therefore a matter of intellectuals coming in contact not with religious sects, but with ambience of intellectualism. This intellectualist mystic of Manichaeism within the Muslim world has also been highlighted by scholars like Robert Simon. So this is just to summarize briefly some of the patterns of scholarly debate on the period. It is worth noting at this stage that early medieval cases and reports of the survival of so-called Manichaeism in Eastern Christendom should be treated critically and cautiously, since in early medieval Byzantium, the term Manichaean was used again and again to label not only alleged heretics, but also political and religious adversaries of the imperial and clerical authorities. Similar dynamics underpins at least some of the accusations of Manichaeism against individual figures, whether intellectuals or officials, in the first 3 centuries of the early and middle Abbasid Caliphate, or indeed in the early Samanid Emirate. By the end of the century, the center of gravity of the Manichaeism seems to have been finally moving entirely across the greater Khurāsān to the east, namely Central Asia and specifically Sogdiana. The study of the eastward expansion of Manichaeism into Central Asia and China received a massive impetus by the discoveries of numerous Manichaean texts in Dunhuang and Toufan early in the 20th century. Manichaeism had early established foothold in Eastern Iran and in the former Kushan areas of sovereignty and influence in Bactrian and Sogdiana, and in religiously and culturally pluralist Central Asia. Manichaeism was to encounter, interact with, and compete for converts both with Buddhism and Nestorian Christianity. Upon the outbreaks of persecution following Mani's death and execution, many Manichaeans were forced to flee eastward and cross the river Amudarya into Sogdiana. Amid the strong Zoroastrian traditions of the region and the increasing Buddhist influence, Manichaeism succeeded nonetheless in gaining important ground in Sogdiana, with some evidence, also material culture, in Samarkand and Panjikent, which is being currently investigated. The Eastern Manichaean communities established their own Central Asian religious leadership and were instrumental in bringing Manichaeism further to the east and into China. In the 6th century, Sogdiana became a stepping stone for the entry and spread of Manichaeism in Eastern Asia and China, greatly facilitated by the reopening of the trades and exchanges between China and states and cities on the more western sections of the Silk Road across Greater Khurāsān. The role of the Iranian-speaking but polylingual Sogdian traders, officials, and diplomats, who among other Sogdians have converted to Manichaeism, in the diffusion and establishment of Manichaeism in Central Asia and then in the Sogdian enclaves in China cannot be overestimated. Having previously played a similarly influential part in the spread of Buddhism in Central Asia and bringing Buddhist as well as Zoroastrian traditions into China, Sogdian trading, cultural and religious networks were also crucial in implanting Manichaeism in Tang Dynasty China between the early 7th century and the beginning of the 10th century, crucially during the period of the progress of Islamic conquest in Central Asia. In 762 and 763, against the background of the intervention of Uyghur Turkic tribal union in China and to help the beleaguered Tang government against the successful expanding rebellion of the half-Sogdian military commander An Lushan, Manichaean priests succeeded in converting the Uyghur Khagan to Manichaeism. This was a truly momentous event in the history of Manichaeism, which secured the monarchical support and patronage of a powerful ruler, which Manichaean leaders had sought ever since many near successful flirtations, religio-political flirtation with the Sasanian king of kings Shapur I. Manichaeism became the official religion, at least of the elite of the new Central Asian steppe empire of the Uyghurs, and now backed by Uyghur political and military power, could fortify its presence and expand its mission further in Central Asia, in Asia, in China. Indeed, given its rather unique character in the history of Gnostic religions, the intriguing association between Manichaeism and kingship ideology in Central Asia during the period of Uyghur supremacy has been attracting some attention, as well as its further implication deserve a much closer analysis. This is the geopolitical situation during this particular period in which Manichaeism established its important religio-political stronghold in Central Asia, in the Uyghur Khaganate, and where we have also extremely interesting coexistence of the Sogdian and the Turkic networks in promoting, maintaining, and patronizing Manichaeism. Also, due to the Uyghur role in putting down the An Lushan rebellion, restoring Tang's rule and its consequent impact in Chinese internal political affairs, Chinese Tang government soon felt compelled to establish Manichaean temples in a variety of its provinces. Thus, during this period of Uyghur influence in China, Manichaeism profited from the status of a privileged foreign religion in China itself. However, this period of stabilization and even spread of Manichaeism in China came abruptly to the end when the Uyghur Empire collapsed in 840 under the military pressure of the Kyrgyz Turkic tribal union. As Uyghur influence in China declined and Manichaeism lost its powerful Uyghur patronage, the Chinese Manichaean temples were closed in stages, and in 843, Manichaeism in China was subjected to massive and systematic persecution. In the Second Uyghur Empire, established in the Tarim region, in the modern Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in northwest China, Manichaeism continued to enjoy the patronage of the Uyghur court, and along with the Manichaean temples, the Manichaean monasteries established and evolved into important centers of learning and missionary activities, as demonstrated by the various extant texts and fragments of Central Asian, Middle Iranian, and Turkic Manichaean literature. Manichaean art, cultivated during this and earlier periods in Central Asia, was to exercise an impact on the miniature painting practiced at the courts of the later Mongol dynasties in Central Asia, as well as Islamic miniature painting and the art of book illustration in West Turkestan and Persia. the
You have,
exact patterns of all these dynamics. Sorry?
you have 5 more minutes, please.
Thank you. Are still to be examined. As I said, one of the interesting dynamics in this particular, but some samples of Turfan Manichaean art, which I'll be showing just to illustrate the type of material culture that has been preserved during this period and continues to be discovered in a succession of spectacular discoveries, particularly in China. One of the interesting dynamics during this period, as I mentioned, was the dynamics between the Sogdian Turkic networks within the Manichaean Church, as well as on a variety of political, religious, and socio-cultural networks. One of the big questions which emerges from this particular period is the extent to which also Manichaeism expanded into Inner Asia and into South Siberia. Currently, particularly in Russian scholarship, Russian archaeology, there is a continuous debate and intensifying debate, which hasn't been acknowledged extensively in Western scholarship. To what extent, particularly in southern Siberia, a variety of Kyrgyz and related Turkic groups have been influenced and impacted by Manichaeism. Currently, the maximalist school, which argues for a greater impact on this Turkic traditions have received impetus from the excavation and rediscovery of a massive Manichaean monastery remains on one of the islands in a highland lake in the South Siberian Russian Republic of Tuva. So this happened amidst the pandemic. But what interests us in this particular sphere and in view of the goals of the conference is the argument that elements of this Turkic Manichaean syncretism and symbiosis also entered layers of Turkic Central Asian Islam, which was exported to eventually to the Middle East and Asia Minor. Thus, we have an eastward-westward cultural transfer of ideas and Turco-Manichaean syncretism symbiosis back to the West with the expansion of various Turkmen tribal groups across the Khurāsān area into Asia Minor and into the Balkans with the establishment of the Ottoman, first the Seljuk, and after that the Ottoman realm in the two areas. This is the current concentration of Alevi, Kızılbaş groups in Anatolia and in the Balkans, and the search for Manichaean layers in their various elements of their doctrinal system and ritual behavior has been advancing with some very conflicting interpretations. I can focus on some of these in the question and answer session, not to prolong my talk anymore, but the purpose of my paper was to illustrate to what extent in this early period the eastward expansion of Manichaeism resulted in a particular religio-cultural matrix which eventually led to the formation of these symbiosis in Central and Inner Asia. And this is the first element, the first trajectory that I followed. And the second, which is positive, not proven, and I'm contesting it, is the westward move of some of these symbioses back to the Middle East, back to Anatolia to some extent, and then to the Balkans, across the Greater Khurāsān, and there establishment as so-called heterodox Islamic tradition in the Ottoman Empire. So in this case, the greater Khurāsān area played the role of a kind of a transmission point, first eastward, then westward, of these syncretisms and symbioses which remain to be explored. Thank you for your attention.